Josh Hasten here in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS News. Thanks so much for joining us. And we wake up today, and there is hope. There is hope, folks. This is amazing news. Fernando Simon Marman, 60 years old, and Louis Har, 70 years old, from Kibbutz Nir Yitzchak. They were hostages in Gaza, freed in an overnight mission carried out by the IDF, Israel Security Agency, and Israeli police force in the town of Rafah. I can't tell you how emotional it is. I literally, this morning, I just came from a Brit Milah, or a circumcision, a ritual circumcision celebration. I can't tell you how many people were in tears, not only because of this baby boy's rite of passage, but because of the fact that 2 Israeli hostages were freed. And what I understand from the ordeal is that the troops who went in and freed these 2 hostages from Rafah actually protected them with their own bodies and escorted them to safety back home to Israel. So that is definitely top story here this morning, a very, very meaningful and emotional day here in the state of Israel. Alex, what did you hear?
There was an intensive firefight overnight. IDF troops went into a civilian home where the hostages were being kept, and intense firefight and battles took place. They killed terrorists, they found hostages, and this very much validates the operation inside Rafah. Everybody knows at this point, as the IDF has moved from the north to the south, Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, believed to be the last stronghold of Hamas in the Strip. There's been a lot of pressure against the IDF not to carry out operations in Rafah because so many of the Gazan civilians have migrated down to the south, and yet the IDF operating on intelligence. This is very important that the IDF has collected some significant intelligence in recent weeks, starting to understand where senior leadership of Hamas is, where hostages are located, operated on intelligence, and succeeded for only the second time since the war started to free a hostage.
Yeah, hopefully this is a sign of things to come. Hopefully all 130 plus hostages will be freed in operations as this. Prime Minister Netanyahu, you brought up Rafah, the southernmost point in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu took to American television over the weekend. He spoke to ABC News. He spoke to Fox News. He said, victory is within reach. And let's go to the clip on that.
Victory is within reach. We have already destroyed 3/4 of the Hamas organized terrorist battalions. 3/4, 18 out of 24. We're not going to leave the other 6. It's like you leaving a quarter of ISIS in Iraq in place, and you say, well, they can have their little territory. It's okay. Obviously, ISIS would reestablish itself. ISIS would reestablish itself too if we don't finish its last remaining bastion. I think the people who are telling you, oh, you can't do it, you can't go into Rafah under any conditions, are basically saying, don't win, lose. And if we lose, everybody loses. You lose too, because this is a battle against the Iran terror axis. This is a battle of the forces of civilization against the worst forces of barbarism on the planet. Victory is within reach. It has to be understood. And victory will be the best thing that will happen, not only for Israel, but for the Palestinians themselves. I can't see a future for the Palestinians or for peace in the Middle East if Hamas is victorious.
And a key point here is, as you mentioned, that the Biden administration is putting extreme pressure, I would say at this point, not to let Israel go into Rafah, at least without some sort of plan. And I think, number one, I think Israel has put forth a plan. And I think Netanyahu, the prime minister, in his news appearances, clearly said that there are safe passages, safe corridors for the so-called civilians there in Gaza, and that they would not be harmed. It would be, obviously, this is a war. Civilians get killed, but to a minimal degree. What is your thought? Again, I have conflicting feelings because on one hand, the civilians of Gaza went all the way south, and now we're saying go back north. I mean, if we're up to me, I would say the international community should demand that Egypt open its border, and they should completely be out of harm's way in the south. I mean, obviously, I'm for Israel going into Rafah, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the question of whether Gazans will exit the Strip into Egypt has been an important question since the beginning of the war. Egypt has basically threatened in the last weeks that if that border gets breached, that the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel will be essentially violated. They've threatened to break the long-lasting peace treaty that they've had. The Egyptians have brought tanks to the border, and it doesn't seem as though the international community nor Egypt is going to tolerate Gazans moving into Rafah. And of course, the IDF has pushed Gazan citizens to the south as they've gone through these counter-terror operations to the north. The problem here is that when you create the civilian corridors, so who goes with the civilians?
Right.
We've heard many reports of Hamas terrorists moving in civilian corridors dressed as civilians. We've heard stories of hostages who were released, of those 110 hostages that Israel got back, that they said that they were dressed up in the hijabs and niqabs and brought down humanitarian corridors as if they were civilians being smuggled. And so the IDF wants to take out these remaining 6 Hamas battalions, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has identified. If you allow safe passage out of Rafah, so who's going to go through that passage? You're going to see also Hamas operatives dressed as civilians as taking the free route out of Rafah, and then they have opportunities to get back down into that tunnel system or hide out in other parts of the Strip. And it forces the IDF to do what it's had to do, which is to go back into places that they've conquered, early on in the battle, and it actually extends the war. So, this mandate that the IDF has to reduce civilian casualties, which it's done better than any other military in the history of modern war, and specifically in urban combat, life is much more difficult when you create those humanitarian passages. And the north and the center areas of the Strip, those are the biggest parts of the Strip.
You mentioned the tunnels. Now, why doesn't Israel turn around and say, listen, Egypt, I know we have this peace, or cold peace, for many, many years now. Why doesn't Israel say, Egypt, you knew about the Hamas tunnels. There's no way Hamas could have, built these tunnels from Egypt to provide weapons, to bring weapons into Gaza. Why doesn't Israel say, stop threatening us, Egypt? You sat there for years and years and years as Hamas built up their military capability. They smuggled in weapons from Egypt. Don't threaten us so quickly.
Well, certainly Israel could be calling Egypt's bluff on this. Egypt also saying that if Israel takes over this, what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is basically the Gazan side of the border with Egypt, and they want to be there specifically to prevent any kind of smuggling across that border. The Egypt has also threatened that if Israel operates in that Philadelphia corridor, that would be the end of the peace treaty as well. Israel has to call Egypt's bluff. With regard to them allowing Gazans, refugees, to come into their territory, the international community should have a lot of leverage. The United States should have a lot of leverage over Egypt. Even Israel should have a lot of leverage over Egypt, and to provide them the incentives that are necessary to allow those that want to flee the war zone to do so. It should be considered a basic human right to allow Gazans that want to flee the war zone the opportunity to do so. The fact that the international community refuses, and Egypt refuses, and Jordan refuses, and all of these supposedly pro-Palestinian countries around the world refuse to take even a singular Gazan refugee, I think speaks volumes about how much they actually care about Palestinians and their fate. They're using them as tools against the state of Israel, and they actually want to see, as Hamas does, as many civilian casualties as possible in order to bolster these claims of genocide against Israel, which are completely ridiculous.
A couple of things. You mentioned the Philadelphia corridor. It should be noted that until 2005, Israel did control the Philadelphia corridor. We had a we had
very imperfect.
Yeah, I shouldn't use the word perfect. We had peace with Egypt. For 30 years or so, more or less, Israel was in control of the Philadelphia corridor. So now they're saying if Israel goes back to the Philadelphia corridor, they're going to break the peace between the two countries.
I think one of the things that we're seeing, and this is very important to understand, is that the United States is imposing terms on other countries. And a lot of what you're hearing out of countries like Saudi Arabia right now, stating that there won't be normalization unless there's a clear path toward Palestinian statehood. These are American demands, not Saudi demands. And it could be the same thing with regards to Egypt, where America is telling Egypt, no, we don't want Israel on the Philadelphia corridor. And we're asking you, Egypt, who's also an ally of the United States, to make that demand on Israel.
And those demands, we did not see them under the last U.S. administration, which validates what you just said in terms of where the actual pressure is coming from. And I want to talk about President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken. I mean, they've been all over the news here in Israel over the last several days. You mentioned pressuring other countries. I don't know if they mentioned Israel by name here, but President Biden issued a memorandum just the other day requiring allies who receive military aid from the U.S. to provide credible, reliable, written assurances of their adherence to international law and providing humanitarian aid and whatnot. I mean, obviously, Israel's front and center when it comes to those comments. He's obviously directing them at us right now. So that's the first thing that Biden said. And then he also said that Israel's conduct in Gaza has been over the top. And then there were things, oh, no, he didn't mean that. He meant something else. Just like, unfortunately, the president right now confused Egypt with Mexico, calling President al-Sisi the head of Mexico. So we saw that he's not all there. Definitely not all
there's
there.
a lot of different things here that you've unraveled. I mean, first we saw, Itamar Ben-Gvir had to apologize because his son tweeted last week that Biden is undergoing cognitive decline. Meanwhile, there's some kind of investigation going on in the United States regarding whether or not President Biden is undergoing cognitive decline. As you mentioned, he called Egypt Mexico. Okay, I don't want to get so much into that, but with regard to him calling the operation in Gaza over the top, it doesn't seem that was a slip of cognitive issue. It does seem that there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of people inside the Biden administration, whether or not that includes Biden, that do hold Israel responsible for what it's doing in the Gaza Strip and don't hold Hamas responsible. They wanted to see a tit-for-tat retaliation. They don't understand that for Israel, that October 7th was a complete paradigm-shifting moment and that there's no tit-for-tat. You carry out on October 7th, there's no second day. There's no second life. And so Israel's been going towards what Netanyahu is now finally calling absolute victory, total victory. This was an ambiguous message that Netanyahu was giving for many, many weeks. And now he's become a lot more clear-cut, saying that Israel's going all the way. Now, you had people in Israel, including General Eisenkot, who sits on the war cabinet, saying that these two goals of eliminating Hamas and recovering the hostages are incompatible goals. And that is why also you've heard the CIA and others in State Department and the Biden administration saying that Israel's goals are not possible of being reached, and therefore they're just carrying out collective punishment, but there's no way that they can accomplish their goals. Netanyahu is clearly stating, and I think that this operation last night with the freeing of these two hostages demonstrates that, no, Israel is going according to intelligence. They are going very strategically and efficiently through Gaza. They are taking out Hamas battalions. They are locating the senior leadership of Hamas, and they're trying to locate hostages. And Netanyahu has stated that it's only going to be this significant military pressure that allows for another negotiation for the release of the final hostages. If such a negotiation is possible, it's only going to come through military force. But you've also talked about the issue of the pressure on Netanyahu, which goes beyond the issue of whether or not they're going to attack in Rafah. You had Biden being reported in the New York Post calling Netanyahu a bad effing guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have many people like quoting anonymous sources in the administration saying you can't work with Netanyahu. You have this story now that comes out from Hillary Clinton. She told NBC's Alex Wagner in an interview, quote, Netanyahu should go. He is not a trustworthy leader. It was on his watch that the attack happened, meaning October 7th. He needs to go. And if he's an obstacle to a ceasefire, if he's an obstacle to exploring what's to be done the day after, he absolutely needs to go. I mean, this is not ambiguous.
No, it's clear what they're talking about.
This is not cognitive decline over here. They're saying they're fed up with Netanyahu. Now, they were fed up with Netanyahu before. I think it's very important to go back in history, go back before October 7th, go back before judicial reforms in the summer. Okay, Netanyahu in his book writes, and Bill Clinton, in fact, corroborated this in an interview. This is something I wrote about as many as 10 years ago. Bill Clinton tried to get Netanyahu out of office in 1999 and actually succeeded in getting him out of office. The State Department in 2015, for example, under Obama, actually gave funds to an organization called V15, which was specifically aimed at overthrowing Netanyahu and replacing him with Bushi Herzog, who's now Israel's president. At that time, he was the head of the Labor Party. This is a common theme in Netanyahu's tenure, is that Democratic administrations, one by one, have always tried to get Netanyahu out of the way. Now, a big part of that is because Netanyahu has stood in the way of the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, Israelis have always been worried that if there would be a Palestinian state, what would it turn into? It would turn into what's going on in Gaza. Hamas would take over. It would become a haven for terror, as we saw on October 7th. And now, after October 7th, the Biden administration, Blinken, and others have just said repeatedly that they think that the natural outcome of what happened on October 7th needs to be a Palestinian state. And the State Department, David Cameron, both stating that they're looking at a path towards a recognition of Palestinian statehood, even without the Palestinians or the Israelis agreeing to that.
It's just not logical. I mean, you saw, what happened on October 7th, with no doubt a direct correlation between Israel turning over territory to the PA, which ended up falling into the hands of Hamas. And if you followed, the war from October 7th till now, if you, let's say, even on Twitter, X, what it's called now, you saw that the fringe, the woke, the squad, if you will, in the United States and Congress and whatnot, they were the ones who were, from the beginning, taking Israel to task, taking Netanyahu to task. But now it's the actual administration. Yeah, Hillary Clinton, I remember, sending out tweets in support of Israel at the very beginning, and now she's joining this choir here, blasting Israel, blasting Netanyahu. I want to talk about what Blinken said. I mean, I think this could be one of the worst. I mean, we mentioned Biden saying that Israel's response is over the top. Blinken on Wednesday in Tel Aviv, he was here in Israel. The obsession with Israel continues. He visited for the fifth time, sixth time, I think the fifth time. He said that Israel cannot use the October 7th attack as, quote, a license to dehumanize others, which I think is, the worst rebuke of Israel, essentially saying that Hamas was justified in what they did. They obviously had a reason for doing it. Israel's on the same level as Hamas. You can't just, take this massacre and say, now you have the right to go in and do what you need to do. There have to be limits. Don't go into Rafah, all these other things. A license to dehumanize others.
Yeah, I mean, we should play that clip of Blinken. You can listen to it here.
Israelis were dehumanized in the most horrific way on October 7th. The hostages have been dehumanized every day since. But that cannot be a license to dehumanize others.
And you hear Blinken saying, yes, Hamas dehumanized Israel on October 7th. And yes, Hamas is dehumanizing the hostages that it's holding inside the Gaza Strip, but Israel does not get a license to dehumanize others. As if
anytime there's a but, Alex, anytime there's a but, that's it. We support Israel's right to defend, but anytime there's a but, and you see this all over from UN officials, US officials, EU officials, all over the place. Anytime they throw a but, automatically what they said before is discredited, in my opinion.
It seems very clear that the United States international community has given Israel a license to fight, but they don't want to give Israel a license to win.
Yeah.
It seems that the United States is comfortable with Hamas remaining in some way inside the Gaza Strip. They say that that Hamas is an idea. It's not a terror organization.
So then what was the point? I mean, really,
that's what they're saying. They're turning around and saying that there was no point. And yes, you had a right to go in there and establish some order and try to recreate deterrence. But the idea of taking out Hamas, specifically because Hamas hides out in civilian areas, because it uses civilians as human shields, because they operate inside of apartments and hospitals and mosques and schools and UNRWA buildings, that's exactly the reason why you can't take them out, because they're giving Hamas a license to dehumanize their own citizens, and instead of allowing them just to be civilians, they're turning them into covers for terror, and then that limits Israel's ability, in their view, to go out and to take out and defeat this terror organization.
I mean, if you don't know it by now, folks, I mean, it's a black and white issue. It's good versus evil. And if you're not on the side of Israel in this, you are supporting evil. If you add that but to any quote and to any sentence, you are supporting Hamas. You are supporting evil. So let's be crystal clear.
But I think that this operation inside Rafah, and you had Biden telling Netanyahu not to press into Rafah without a plan, and Netanyahu has basically said, we're at war, and we also understand that we don't have an open timetable. That the pressure continues to mount on Israel. But Netanyahu says, I'm going to stand up to the pressure, and we're going to keep pressing on with the operation. And not only are they continuing to take out Hamas leaders and uncover more and more tunnels and more weapons and degrade Hamas's ability to fire rockets at civilian population centers in Israel, but they're also coming up with, for the first time in many, many weeks, hostages. And that is something that, I think really demonstrates the wisdom of Netanyahu, the backbone of Netanyahu to stand up to this pressure. And it's immense pressure. I don't think anybody in the world can really understand the type of pressure that Benjamin Netanyahu is under domestically, internationally, and also knowing that his legacy as a prime minister is on the line if he does not deliver major military success in this battle against Hamas and possibly also against Hezbollah and Iran before this war is over.
Let's hope he stands firm, and with all this pressure coming from all over the world and here locally, as you said. Last week, we talked about the fact that the U.S. government sanctioned 4 residents of Judea and Samaria, technically 3 residents of Judea and Samaria, 4th resident, all accused of so-called settler violence. We brought up that case. Now, again, the U.S. going after 4 specific individuals, but if you read what was written there in the document, Khan News reported just over the last 24 hours or so that the U.S. government perhaps is going to sanction not only those 4 guys, but IDF soldiers in Judea and Samaria. And this is according to an internal report at the Foreign Ministry, that it is possible that the U.S. could turn around and, using that executive order, that EO, it could say, no, we're not only going after these 4 guys. We're going to start investigating IDF soldiers who are operating in Judea and Samaria. Perhaps it could lead to investigating civilians, Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria also, or really anyone who supports life in Judea and Samaria. Who knows where this could lead? I mean, it's a Pandora's box what they did by issuing this executive order.
It's a very, very slippery slope right now. It's so important to understand that the 4 individuals in Judea and Samaria that were sanctioned and they had their accounts frozen in Israeli banks, they have never been convicted of crimes in Israel. So the question is, how's the United States figuring out who they want to sanction, okay, and which organizations that are funded by the New Israel Fund and probably get funding from the network of George Soros and others are doing investigations. They're passing information on to organizations like J Street, or then lobbying inside the State Department and providing them lists of people that they think that the United States should sanction. Now, because the banks here in Israel operate on the international banking system, on SWIFT, they are nervous that if they don't abide by the U.S. sanctions regime, that they could be shut off as banks and not be able to conduct international transactions. So they're in a very difficult spot. And you have a situation now where now the law of the land is no longer the law of the land. That arbitrary executive order, which is not legislation in the United States, where one man can sign into law something basically determining the rights of Israeli citizens who have never been convicted to conduct financial transactions in their home country. It's not that they're saying, these 4 people can't come into the United States, right? They're basically forcing Israeli banks to shut off their bank accounts. And as you said, this is slippery slope, because if they can do this to people that have not been convicted of crimes in any court, there's no stopping that, right? And you see here that the United States wants there to be a Palestinian state. They've said it explicitly over and over again. They believe that Jewish settlement, quote unquote, which is basically suburban living inside Judea and Samaria, which are the biblical provinces where every story in the Torah takes place, that this is the obstacle to peace in the entire Middle East and maybe in the entire world. And therefore, that anybody that supports this, Anybody that operates against Palestinian terrorists, whether that is outside of the military, like they're accusing these 4 citizens, or even the military. If the international community, if the United Nations can turn around and say that Israel is carrying out human rights violations, which is arbitrary and biased, then the United States can turn off the ability to fund these organizations, these individuals. It's a very, very dangerous situation, and it's not clear how Israel can fight back against that.
So maybe this is a shameless plug, but I actually wrote about the issue of the banks on JNS.org this past week after speaking to a senior banking official in the private sector who essentially said what you said, that if people are sanctioned by the U.S. government, then the banks here, they're not playing around, that they are going to give in, that they are going to go along with those sanctions. They're not going to take a risk, that they are going to also be blacklisted. And again, how we started this conversation, again, we're not just talking about those 4 people, but it could lead to that slippery slope where more and more people are being studied, put under the microscope of the U.S. for simply supporting Judea and Samaria. I don't know, are you very active on X, Twitter these days?
Somewhat active on X.
So one of the hashtags which has been trending for a while now is hashtag UNRWA is Hamas. And we have more proof now that UNRWA is, in fact, Hamas. Again, that's the UN Relief Workers Agency that's supposed to be helping so-called Arab refugees, which hasn't, to the best of my knowledge, resettled one single refugee over the past 76 years. Instead, is holding them in perpetual limbo as serving refugee status, keeping them as pawns against the state of Israel. But we saw from the IDF that a Hamas data center has been found underneath the Gaza headquarters of UNRWA, replete with servers, electricity, a backup power station, and living quarters for terrorists. I mean, and then UNRWA claimed they didn't know anything about it. It was literally right under their noses, right under their head facility there in Gaza. In other words, Hamas terrorists were walking around daily, going in and out of this facility, which is right under their building, and UNRWA claims they know nothing. It is obviously true. And we know, we have proof that, UNRWA, as we said last week, UNRWA individuals were involved in the October 7th massacre. I also wanted to mention earlier, I didn't get a chance to, an Al Jazeera journalist now, by the way. He's not really a journalist. He claims to be a journalist. He's actually a Hamas commander of the so-called Nun-Ted, I think, what's it called, the Cornet missiles, those really deadly missiles. He's a commander in that division of Hamas. Al Jazeera journalist by day and Hamas military commander by night. But again, back to UNRWA, more and more proof that, in fact, hashtag UNRWA is Hamas.
Yeah, UNRWA is the worst perpetuator of this ongoing refugee status. They don't want there to be a solution to this. They even confer the refugee status onto 2nd, 3rd, and now 4th generation, great-grandchildren of refugees who living in the same country that they supposedly got kicked out of, just continue to be refugees living in specific slum cities that are called refugee camps. And are specifically not invested in because they want to keep them in slums and refugee camps that they want to have. This could be solved in a minute. This year, UNRWA's budget was $1.6 billion. Okay. UNRWA, what they do is they are the #1 employer. They are the largest employer inside the Gaza Strip. By the way, they don't just operate in Gaza. They operate throughout Judea and Samaria. They operate in Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's 7 minutes down the road from our studios.
And they run most of the schools. There is so much video evidence that anybody can find. You go to websites like Palestinian Media Watch. You go to organizations like Impact-SE and others, and you will see the type of hatred that's being taught. It's not just that the refugee status is being perpetuated, but actual incitement to violence, and as we saw on October 7th, participation in these attacks. And there's no way that the cause of the problem can be considered the solution. That's why Netanyahu has said that UNRWA needs to be investigated, needs to be replaced. Israel should take actions to expel UNRWA from the country. When is Israel going to understand that this battle is not just taking place on the military front? Okay, there are other fronts of this battle. UNRWA is Hamas. If UNRWA is Hamas and you're saying that you're going to take Hamas out, that means you have to take UNRWA out. You have to expel them from the country. If Hamas is Al Jazeera, if Al Jazeera is, if their journalists are participating, it's not just Al Jazeera journalists. We also have proof of CNN journalists and Reuters photographers and others that participated in an October 7th attack. If Hamas is the journalists, in the very beginning of the war, there was talk about shuttering Al Jazeera in Israel. How come that hasn't happened?
So actually, right before the show, it's been raised again that Israel is considering shutting down Al Jazeera broadcasting because obviously they are not bringing the truth to their listeners. They're bringing, at least this journalist, and I would assume others, Hamas propaganda to the world.
I think that the other important point here is that the Palestinian Authority itself is not much different than Hamas. They're continuing to incite towards terror, and they finance terror. And so the idea that Hamas in the Gaza Strip will give way to the Palestinian Authority is an absolutely flawed concept, and there's no way that Gaza Strip can be handed back over to the Palestinian Authority. They lost control of Gaza in 2006, 2007. They gave way to Hamas. Right now, polls show that if there would be an election inside Judea Samaria, the West Bank, that Hamas would defeat the Palestinian Authority. So there's no concept of democracy or voting there because that would just give way to Hamas. And there's also the possibility that there could be internal civil strife, a civil war between Palestinians that Hamas could take over anyways. There's more sympathy inside Palestinian Authority areas for Hamas than there is for the Palestinian Authority. So the idea that the Palestinians, you have the Palestinian Authority, you have UNRWA, you have Hamas, this is all part of a singular network that promotes, incites, and participates in terror. And until there is some other kind of leadership that develops, and this is crazy because the international community keeps asking Netanyahu, what happens on the day after? So they want Netanyahu to be responsible, but they don't want Israel to be sovereign. They want the Palestinians to be responsible, but they have no capacity to be responsible. It's a double standard. It's a conundrum that's placed on Israel, and it's hard to understand, why there's so much pressure on Netanyahu to make a Palestinian state when it's so clear that a Palestinian state would just turn into the Gaza Strip.
You mentioned the PA and Hamas. They may not like each other. They may not get along when it comes to destroying the state of Israel. They both want to do that. The PA in stages, Hamas all in once. That's really the only difference between the two. Last night, there were two terrorist stabbing attempts, one in Jerusalem and one in Gush Etzion. And the one in Gush Etzion, I'm not sure who took responsibility for the one in Jerusalem. Maybe the one in Gush Etzion, it was the so-called Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is an offshoot, a terrorist offshoot, and Fatah is a terrorist organization also, but an offshoot of Fatah, which is essentially, a branch of the Palestinian Authority. So the PA also cannot be trusted in terms of bringing peace to this area. Not much different than Hamas. Let's get on to one other topic here before we go. Israel's credit rating. And I'm not too familiar with economics, and maybe this is a subject you could handle, but I think it's very, very important. JNS, citing Globes, reported this week that this could be a major blow to Israel's economy. You'll have to explain this to me. The international ratings agency called Moody's has lowered Israel's credit rating from A1 to A2 due to the effects of the war. What does this mean for Israel? Is this a big deal? Is this something we can brush aside? I saw some politicians were saying, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Our economy's fine. What does this Moody's decrease in ranking from A1 to A2 practically mean for the state of Israel?
Well, Moody's basically citing the war and saying that the war is taking a toll on the Israeli economy, and therefore, the economy is weakened. And the war is certainly expensive. It does not hit at any of the foundations of the Israeli economy. The foundations of this economy are strong. They're among the strongest in the world. Now, talk of downgrading in ratings was not sudden. Okay, during the summer when Israel had these massive judicial reform protests, part of what the anti-reform protesters did was lobby credit agencies to threaten to lower Israel's credit rating in the world. And they had already changed the outlook on Israel from positive to stable, and threatened further actions. And they waited for this moment when Israel can't do anything about it to turn around and to lower the credit rating. But we haven't seen a massive impact on the shekel in the days since they've done it. Again, I think that this is political, and Smotrich, who's Israel's finance minister, has said that this is political. Again, this threats came before the war even started. You would think that if Israel actually succeeded in taking out Hamas, that this would strengthen Israel's financial and economic outlook, because if they eliminate Hamas's ability to create these security flare-ups, as they've done almost every year for the past many years, that would create greater stability in Israel. So there is a hope that Israel will be able to recover. I think that the smartest investors in the world understand that the Israeli economy is innovative and strong. But what this is very important, this is an attempt at BDS, essentially, which is by lowering the rating, what they're doing is that they are virtue signaling to investors around the world that they should not put their money in Israel. So this is a formal type of BDS that Moody's has basically leveled on Israel. I don't think it is representative of the strength of Israel's economy. You look at the A2 rating, it's other countries that have much, much weaker economies are in the A2 rating than Israel. Israel is a top flight, first world, innovative, entrepreneurial economy. And I think that all investors in the world that are clever and smart and understand what makes Israel such a vibrant country recognize that, and hopefully they'll continue to invest.
So I'm glad there's some positivity despite the negative, at least the negative feeling that I got from reading that story. And we're nearly out of time here, but I have probably the most important question for you today. Alex, did you watch the Super Bowl? It started at 1:30 a.m. our time. Did you watch the Super Bowl, Alex? I know you did.
I didn't watch the Super Bowl yet. It's one of those things when you move to Israel, you get a little bit disconnected. I do like watching football. I hope I'll be able to watch maybe a condensed version of the game a little bit later. I heard it was a great game. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I did not watch the Super Bowl. I think for the first time in Super Bowl Live. I think it was the first time in 20 years. I was just too tired, and I wanted to come in, kind of fresh to record the show here today. So I figured I wouldn't be if I stayed up all night. But my main reason for asking you that is that there were two different campaigns going on, two different ads which appeared, or series of ads which appeared during the big game. Number one, the Robert Kraft's Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism, FCAS, took out some ads.
Robert Kraft, who's the owner
of the Patriots, and huge supporter of Israel, and not only football in Israel, but many things in Israel.
He's built football fields here in Jerusalem.
Yeah, provided many jobs to people in Israel through his companies. So he is an icon here. He had one campaign, and there was another campaign run by the Israeli government, I believe. And again, these are $7 million commercials for 30 seconds. That's the price. I think tied with last year's Super Bowl, but making it the two most expensive 30 seconds you can buy for your money on television.
Yeah, JNS can't afford commercials.
No, not yet. You'll get there. We'll get there one day. So again, Robert Kraft taking out ads to combat anti-Semitism. 1 in 4 Americans apparently have experienced anti-Semitism over the last, I don't know if it's a year or several years. And at the same time, the Israeli government took out ads trying to raise awareness, if you will, about the hostages in Gaza. Did you get it? At least you didn't see the game yet, and I also hoping to watch it later on today. But did you see clips of those ads and your thoughts on those ads?
I think the question is, are these ads going to raise awareness about anti-Semitism in a way that wakes people up and realizes that anti-Semitism is harmful? Or does shining the magnifying glass on anti-Semitism actually magnify anti-Semitism?
What do you think about it?
Are haters around the world, or in the United States watching these ads and laughing? Are they thinking like, oh, anti-Semitism's on the rise? That's great.
Let's get on the bandwagon.
And the question is are Super Bowl ads the right way of combating anti-Semitism? I think when you talk about the cost of those ads, if you think about how much money has been thrown at organizations that are supposed to counter anti-Semitism, chief among them probably the Anti-Defamation League, which has budgets in the $100 million a year range, and so many other organizations that are out there with the a goal, the mission of countering anti-Semitism, it doesn't necessarily seem that throwing money at the problem of anti-Semitism is being effective to combat anti-Semitism. So that's just a question that I have. To me, like when I watch in the Super Bowl, I want to see an ad for a technology company or a beer or something like
Doritos.
That. Yeah, Doritos, Pizza Hut. I'm not sure that that's the right forum for countering anti-Semitism. And I would say that, for 30 seconds of fleeting attention, if JNS would have an additional $7 million, that would help us to hire many, many more people to be constantly outing the anti-Semites and to be highlighting the good initiatives and to be doing a lot of work that I think would probably be much more effective at combating anti-Semitism than 2 30-second ads.
They certainly got the eyeballs. I didn't see the stats on how many people watched the game last night, but they definitely got the eyeballs, at least that. So, we'll plug JNS. Go to jns.org. Support us today. Support all our important work and all the journalists.
It's a nonprofit organization.
There you go.
Reader supported.
Completely unscripted. We weren't going to even, this wasn't part of the plan.
It gave me a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Go to jns.org. And, of course, go to JNS TV, either on the website or on YouTube, to see more shows like this. And, of course, support JNS today. Big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz, engineer extraordinaire. We wouldn't be able to get on the mic without Ryan's hard work and his dedication to JNS. Thanks so much for joining us. Myself, on behalf of Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS, my name is Josh Hasten. We are in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, broadcasting from the JNS studios. Have a wonderful week. Have a safe week, everybody. And let's hope for only good news ahead.
Thanks, Josh.